there, welcome to another double bill. This is an Elaine May double bill, basically. It's A New Leaf and Ishtar, which is an infamous bomb. Now, you probably think I would do Ishtar as What the Hell Is This? But no, I've got another What the Hell Is This? Far more deserving of a What the Hell Is This than Ishtar is. Ishtar is one of those bombs that are in the class of like Hudson Hawk or Last Action Hero, which is there was a lot of problems in them, but there's some interesting stuff there too. It's like it's a likeable mess. It's not, anything to sneer at. I did not deserve the beating it got. It's not that kind of mess. I'll get to that. I'm first going to go to A New Leaf, and A New Leaf is the first Elaine May film. Elaine May earlier on worked with Mike Nichols and did a comedy act. Mike Nichols moved on to become a director once they broke up. And Elaine May stayed a writer, she did plays. Then she moved on to writing films and directing films. And she made 4 films in her career before Ishtar pretty much ended it. Which is a real shame because she had a lot of talent. Basically, A New Leaf was her debut. After A New Leaf, May went on to do Heartbreak Kid, which was a success. Then she made another film which was called, sorry about this, Mickey and Nicky, which was a failure. I've not seen this film, but it's one of those films that no one got, and her career kind of died for well. But after that, she was helping out Warren Beatty with Heaven Can Wait and Reds, and was generally viewed as she'd helped bunch of other films as well, and she'd been viewed as a really good script doctor and someone who could help her friends in different films. So after all this, Warren Beatty wanted to give her another chance at a director, so they made Ishtar, which was a disaster that ended her directing career. A New Leaf, the first film she made, is full-on genius. This is one of those great early films that suggested a talent should have been much further ahead than it actually did. But I think it was too weird for most people. I think it was just a case of May was an eccentric person who never quite latched onto the mainstream. Because, Ishtar is a really weird film for the mainstream. It's one of those ones that's like, he spent all his money on a film that was a cult film, ultimately. And so May makes cult films in a sense. She makes films, it's not for everybody. But if you're in the right wavelength, it's great. A New Leaf is about this guy, played by Walter Matthau, who's rich, he's snobbish. People are sick of him because he inherited money. He's not worked a day in his life. He's got an education which he never uses. He likes to do whatever he wants to do and spend money wherever he wants to spend money. But he's been overspending his inheritance for years because he hasn't realised he's running lower on funds than he should. At a certain point, he runs out of money. This happens in the first couple of minutes of the film. And so he has to decide, what does he do? Like, how does he survive? Does he commit suicide out of shame? Because all the people who could help him out will not, because they're all sick of him, because he has been horrible to them. So he latches on a thing of, he'll get married. He'll find a rich heiress, get married, and he'll live off her money. Easier said and done since he doesn't actually like women very much. And he can't stand most of them. And he doesn't say, I have to talk to them, what? And he's at 6 weeks to find a wife, which goes pretty quick and he cannot get anywhere. And he owes his uncle money at this point. If he doesn't give it back, basically means he's destitute and he's lost everything. And his uncle really wants that to happen, just out of revenge. So that's the setup. He meets his intended, played by Elaine May, who's this clumsy, klutzy, weird person who has no self-confidence. She's into botany. That's all she's into. She talks very quiet. She doesn't have any social grace. She's been in her own head. She's this person who's had money, so she's been isolated from the world, and she's been basically ripped off everybody. So she's never developed confidence. So, and of course, Matthau's character sees her as a perfect wife who he then can poison and get the money because he's planning to kill her. And that's his great scheme. So that's what he's doing. He's going to kill her. And marry her and kill her. There are complications. They try and tell her that this guy's trying to keep is after money. She does, and May's character is absolutely crazy, and she doesn't get it, or she wants the logic in such a weird way that makes no sense to anybody. And Mattel actually gets to marry her, despite all the warnings. And then the second half of the movie is essentially him trying to A, kill her, which never works, and B, he starts to actually like her. And he starts to actually help her out because he realises she's been ripped off by her financial advisor, by her staff. Everyone's ripping her off, so he actually helps her out, and is like, at a certain point he starts to realise he actually likes her. So it's a case of this, it's been the change of this person from being someone who is selfish and hedonistic into someone who has to be a kind of responsible citizen. It's sort of like growing up, basically. It's a metaphor for growing up, but with characters who are in their 40s who should have grown up a long time ago. And it's wonderful, because Mattel is really a lot of fun playing this guy. The dialogue's great, but it's also very weird. You know, it's about people having points of view that are not normal. They've been rich, haven't had a chance to actually deal with real life. So, and having to deal with these people is impossible for these others. Like Mattel's financial advisor is trying to tell him he has no money. And he's like, I have no other way to say this. You have no money. You know, I'm trying to find a different way of saying it. And, you know, his butler, Mattel's butler, is helping all the way he can because it's a good gig for him because Mattel is so weird, and he's got a weird dialogue as well. Great, terrific dialogue. It's wonderful dialogue, but it's out of the mainstream. It's eccentric. Like some people will not like this dialogue or this film. It's weird, but these rich people who haven't grown up, haven't let it grow up, and Mattel's character essentially having to learn to live with someone, actually care for them, and actually not just look into himself, and to look out for other people. And it's just beautiful. It's a beautiful film. It's one of the best films I've seen this year. And probably one of my top films of the year for films that were not made this year. If that makes sense. Now, it was a film that was meant to be, I think it was, the first cut was like 3 hours long. And May more or less has said in interviews that she didn't have a clue what she was doing. She didn't understand master shots and close-ups and how they intercut, and it took her a long time, and people expect her to just get fired because she was giving the directors a gig because of strange reasons, and she wasn't really experienced, so she just learned on the job. So I think the first cut was like 3 hours long, and she said more or less the whole idea was that someone who's a murderer gets away with it. Was the idea of the story she was adapting, and that was a bit that was cut out of the film because it was too long. So they cut out the bit that apparently Mattel killed one or two other people before he got to the woman he fell in love with, and apparently it was just too dark for them, and the film was too long, so they cut that bit out, and she was very unhappy about it. I have no idea how good or bad those sequences were. I have nothing to go on because no one's ever seen them. I'm just going by the film itself. The film is amazing by itself. The film that we got released is amazing. All the scenes work. All the scenes are wonderful. It's one of those films you actually watch dreading it going wrong, because the idea of someone having to... The plot being you have to marry someone for their money and then kill them can go wrong pretty easily. I mean, Mike Nichols did a film 3 years later with Jack Nicholson and Warren Beatty called Fortune, with a similar premise, and it's nowhere near as good as A New Leaf. A New Leaf's so much better than it, and this one is obviously Mike Nichols never quite worked out. And I'm probably going to get to that film down the line because I've got plans for doing a couple of Mike Nichols films, but that was like the wrong way. That was a way you dread someone doing it. In a case of, it was a really interesting film with lots of funny scenes, but it was mishandled and weird, and it didn't quite connect together as a film. It just has a lot of good scenes. In this film, there's lots of great scenes, but it connects together as a story as well. And you're like, I can follow all this. This all makes sense. This is all wonderful. So A New Leaf is just terrific. Because it changes what it's doing every 20 minutes in a very easy way where you think, oh, it's going in this direction, it's changes subtly to another direction, and it's subtly changing another direction. And it seems to always know when people are getting bored with this plot development and have to move to the next one now. And it's like, it's just one of those films that just works. It works so well. It's out of print now on DVD in the Britain, or Blu-ray. I managed to get it on streaming. I'm hoping someone does a good release of it again. Eureka had it, and I was just too late for looking for it, really, ultimately. So I'm going to have to look out for a copy. Hopefully there's a second-hand copy somewhere. So now we're going to Ishtar, which is May's final film. This was made in the 80s, and it was a big box office disaster. A cost celebre. It's one of those things, any film that is this hated, these films are never the worst films ever made. They just never are. It's always because there's a big star involved. It's a film that didn't work commercially. And usually it's a bit weird. So people object to how weird it is. Why you spend all this money in this weird film? People get really mad about people spending a lot of money in a film that doesn't work, that's weird. They get really mad about it in a way that it's like, so? There's so many objectionably bad films, like Battlefield Earth, that cost a fortune. There's so many really bad films like the original Avengers from the 90s that are wow bad. It's like, how did anyone see these dailies and not shut it down straight away bad? This one, no, it's eccentric, it's weird, but it's not bad. I mean, the only people who make videos with this and how bad it is people who are just sheep, who don't really, they don't have any backbone to say, look, this is weird. This is not a bad film. It's a weird film. It definitely has things that don't work in it. But so what? Perfection's boring. This one's still one of the more interesting weird bombs of the recent era, And this was the 80s. It's no longer that recent, but it's the 80s and 90s, they made bombs that were fascinating. I mean, that's the era where directors who actually had interesting point of views made bombs. You get weird films like 1941. You get this, you get Hudson Hawk, which are just directors who are doing these weird films that are kind of fascinatingly odd. I mean, Last Action Hero was very flawed, but it's got lots of interesting things in it. Showgirls I've done a video on. It's got massive problems, but it's fascinating how Verhoeven was making a satire, plus he was making a blooming melodrama at the same time, and he was just being weird. It's just like this was an era of when we made bombs correctly. You took Bonfire of Vanities, which was De Palma doing God knows what with a good source material, but it was so interestingly odd. It was like, well, I've watched this quite a few times now. I've read the book. I know it's a disastrous adaptation of the book, but it's fascinating how weird it is. So it was an era where they really made bombs properly. Nowadays, if someone makes a bomb, you're barely interested in it. This is when they took out studios with bombs. I mean, Heaven's Gate was a Notorious bomb. It is a wonderfully odd film. New York's a wonderfully odd film. There's so many mega bombs that are wonderfully odd. Cat People with Schrader. It's insane. It's just, I think that was a drug-fueled film, from what I gather from reading about it. And good, because it's wonderfully odd. It's like, this is a time when people made mega bombs that were heavily rewatchable. There are still films that are brought back for re-releases now. I mean, they're releasing Cat People in 4K, Ishtar and Elaine May stuff is actually harder to find, because it is weird, and I think because of Ishtar, it's like she tainted with something that wasn't really true. So you can't find some of her early films. It's just a weird situation. Now, Ishtar is a very satirical film. It is, probably the most, outside of Starship Troopers, probably one of the more satirical American films. Which probably did not help it for reviews, especially for the people who are pro Reagan would probably loathe this film because it's obviously taking the mickey out of the CIA. So it's about these deeply incompetent songwriters played by Dustin Hoffman and Warren Beatty, who one of them was he does odd jobs, and he worked as an ice cream man for a bit, but he wants to be a songwriter and he's terrible, played by Warren Beatty. He's terrible with women, which is part of the joke. Anyway, Dustin Hoffman is a slightly more confident. He's the one with the front of charisma. He can talk to people, but he's just as messed up. And he's like, he can go out and actually get a crowd going a little bit more. He's a bit more confident, but he's a guy who can do good cover song versions and stuff. He can't write himself. He can do good cover songs. That's what he really does. But they want to be songwriters, and they're terrible. Paul Williams, who wrote the music for this one, also did the score for De Palma's Phantom of the Paradise, which is another film which has amazing songs with amazing lyrics. This one is not as good as Phantom for the lyrics. This one does not have songs about suicide. But it does have lots of funny, bad songs that are wonderfully tacky when you listen to the lyrics. And, the first 20 minutes of this film is terrific. It's really terrific. It's about them in New York. And it's all about their kind of struggles and their failures and how terrible they are and how they're trying to spruce each other up and try and keep themselves going even after one disaster after another. And it goes into all the kind of wannabe bands in New York, and there's a lot of funny stuff in there about how strange some of these bands are, but how weirdly derivative they are at the same time. You can tell different fads that people are following, try to get ahead, and none of them's working. And Beatty and Hoffman, I want to be Simon Garfunkel, and they are bitchy about both of them all the time because they're jealous, which is really a lot of fun. So the first 20 minutes is hilarious. It's really, really funny and very dry, and it's a wonderfully oddball performances. Then it goes to Morocco and Ishtar, and the plot kicks in. That doesn't work as well, but it's still good. It's just that there's a problem with Beatty. Is the big thing. There's two big problems with the film. The first one is Warren Beatty in the Moroccan scenes. Is that Dustin Hoffman is actually the star of the film, essentially. He's a comedy guy, and he's got all the best scenes, essentially, because he makes the best of what he's got. He's like energetic. He's the guy in the film that you feel he's trying to keep the film going. He's energetic and he's trying things in scenes, and anytime he's with Charles Grodin as the guy who's the CIA guy who's manipulating him, every time there's with him, they're great fun. When he's trying to keep Warren Beatty upbeat and stuff, he's great fun. He's great fun all the time. He's the thing that keeps the film going, even when he's been utterly ridiculous, which he is for most of the film, because he just jumps into ridiculousness all the time. He just keeps going, and it's one of the more often more interesting, fun performances because he's playing a lightweight and he seems to have a lot of enjoyment out of it. I mean, part of the film was pretty difficult, but he seems to be like, okay, well, I'm going to enjoy myself anyway. I'll keep doing stuff and see what happens, and so he's a joy that actually comes through the film and he keeps the film going. Beatty doesn't. Beatty feels like a guy who's trapped in a party, doesn't quite know how to expand. Because there's lots of scenes in the second half of the film where they have to do parodies of spycraft, and you have to ham it up a little bit. Charles Grodin knows how to ham it up. Hoffman knows how to ham it up, even with ridiculous stuff like blind camels and double crosses, and all the double crosses are kind of vaguely incompetent because both the CIA and these songwriters and all the different people around them are all incompetent in different ways. And that's the joke. And there has to be a sense of these incompetents flying all over the place and causing havoc. That's the big joke of the film. But Beatty can't quite rise up to that, and he's the guy who keeps on bringing it down because he cannot rise up to the timing of what this film needs. Which is bizarre because if you look at The Fortune, he's very good at the comedy then. But this one he does not have a grasp. He's playing a guy who is not good with women, who's not confident. But he doesn't really jump into that the way that Hoffman jumps into incompetence. Hoffman seems to be enjoying the incompetence of his character. Well, Beatty seems to be like a bit uneasy about it. He seems uneasy about looking that stupid, really. And it's a thing that can drag some of the scenes down and makes some of the scenes, it feels like you have one guy doing all the work, another guy's not. And you just feel the film keeps on losing some of its pace because of Beatty not quite delivering a comic performance he should be doing. He just feels like an actor who's miscast, but he's a producer, so you can't get rid of him. But it seems that no one's ever could really. It feels that May could not get him up to the level of the film needed. I mean, Isabella Gianni's in it as well as the person who's manipulating him and who's trying to get this map that will help her people rise up against the powerful oppressors of Ishtar and cause a uprising. And she's fun, she's a good actress, but I mean, she's not been asked to do much, but she's doing what she can in a bad situation. But she's got to do a lot of scenes with Beatty, and she's more chemistry with Hoffman. Which is odd because Beatty and her are dating. But the scenes with her and him, with Beatty and her, are the worst scenes in the film. They just feel like it's like they're trying to get these laughs out of this situation, and they're sending Beatty looking for a blind camel, which is completely absurd and should work like gangbusters because it's obviously so absurd, and it's not landing. And it's like, well, why isn't it landing? It's because it's Beatty. He's not delivering the farce that the film needs. He just seems to be pulling back, and he's not prepared to do the jump up to full on uselessness that Hoffman is. And that becomes a problem with the film, is every time they go further and further ahead into more and more absurd situations where they're getting lost in the desert because they've been conned by the CIA, and both sides are trying to kill them for different reasons. And there's lots of machinations with Groden and the guy in charge of the country, which are hilarious. So all these scenes are working, and then you go to the bits with Beatty and he just drags it down. You know, it's the kind of thing that really, I mean, he's the key for why it doesn't quite deliver in the second half, is that because in the first half in New York he's much more confident. I heard they shot that stuff later. But in the scenes in Morocco, he does not seem confident. He does not seem ready to jump up and actually be incompetent the way he needs to be for this film to work. To have the farce to work, he needs to be incompetent. He seems uneasy and very tight, and he sets it up, and then when the point where he has to really go to the next level of someone who doesn't know what they're doing, is under their head, and has to kind of improvise, and has to get even crazier. He doesn't bring the crazy. He just doesn't bring it, and it's like that's what you need in these films, these kind of farces. You need someone, the person who's not confident, to actually jump up and actually go even more quietly insane. And he doesn't pull that off. Hoffman does, but he doesn't. And that's the big problem with the film, ultimately. Because you have lots of scenes that are working, and then you have Beatty who's not working in this part. But he works for the first section. And everything around him works, but he's not working. The second part of the film is, I think it's because it was the farcical thing of everyone's incompetent, means that there's also a sense of, as you go further on, there's a sense that it's a bit directionless of where it's going, because it doesn't seem to have an end in mind. And it's about these people. I think it makes it interesting, though, is these people wandering around that situation. They don't quite know where they're going. That's what makes the film interesting as a film. But it makes it very culty, But I think some of that's to do with Beatty not quite delivering in the energy level that he needs for this. And I think it creates sections of the film where there's an energy deficit when there shouldn't be one. There wasn't planned to be one, but there is. So if you look at May's look at A New Leaf, there's none of that energy drop. There's always a comedy stuff. And he has a lot of people with comedy chops doing scenes. And there's lots of funny stuff about the corruption on both sides and how they're... So I will send them out to the desert to die. These are the good guys who are trying to get peace for the people and are getting hunted down. And they're willing to send these guys out to get killed. All that stuff's really funny. And then suddenly it can lose direction when Beatty's there. And I think some of it has to do with Beatty. I think some of it also, I think, about the script. I think there was no end point, really. No strong end point that the film needed. But that's what makes it interesting, though. So to me, it's like, well, the conventional thing's not there, but I like it where it went instead. But I can see why it would annoy lots of people. But that's no excuse to give it all these horrible reviews. That was no excuse. Because there's still like 2/3 of the films that really work. It's just that bit that doesn't work. And it does have a great finale. It does have a hilarious finale where the CIA have to pay for the musical career of these two loser musicians for all these horrible songs. And it has to basically, because of the absurdity of all the mess they've caused in interactions with the rebels, the person, the guy in charge, and all these other different factions, they made such a mess of the CIA that they actually have to back the left-wing militias to get reforms. So it's a whole joke about it is that it's a left-wing militia and they say against them, and the film's with the left-wing Bolsheviks, really, over the right-wing guys. So it's a very much a lefty film that costs a fortune. Which, again, is another thing that's funny about it, is like, they spent all this money in this film that's got a left-wing agenda. That's you don't get nowadays. So, yeah, I kind of adore Ishtar, even though it's got lots of flaws. There's still beautiful stuff in there. And the early stuff's great, and Hoffman throughout the film is terrific. He's always entertaining. It's one of his more likable performances because he's enjoying playing this guy who's a loser, who's completely delusional about his competencies. He has no clue how incompetent he actually is. And that's funny. You put me next to Grodin, who can size him up. But Grodin's also thinks he's smarter than he actually is. So all this stuff really works. And it's just the other stuff that doesn't. It drags down a little bit, but it doesn't really kill it. It still keeps an interesting film. It's still a satirical film about the 80s and CIA and, you know, all the dodgy stuff that goes on. So I definitely recommend it. See this film. Ignore the bad press. It's much better than people have suggested it is. So that's me for now. I hope you go watch both of these films, especially A New Leaf. A New Leaf is terrific. You know, it's just one of those films that's just a home run, entirely a home run. And on a subject that could have been a disaster, but it's just so funny. It's great performances. Everybody's great in it. The lead actors are great. The supporting parts are all great. The film, every scene is laugh out funny. But also weird as hell at the same time, which is really hard to do. So, enjoy both of these films. They're really good. So I'll see you later. Right, bye for now.